Now, if you can justify the price, if you can explain, well, we find, let's say, 10 stones per year in Brazil. 10 stones the entire year over 2 carats. And you want one, right? So when you can explain that that kind of rarity is the reality of Paraíba, then you start to be able to justify the price. My name is Kevin Ferreira. I am a graduate gemologist from GIA. I specialize in Paraiba Tourmaline sourcing and Paraiba Tourmaline education. My background is extensively involved with gemstones. My family has been mining gemstones since before I was born. My father started mining Paraíba back in 2001 in Brazil, and my uncle subsequently now mines Paraíba in Africa. And on my mother's side, we've been involved with lapidary, with cutting stones, for about 2 generations in Minas Gerais, the northern part of Brazil. My personal involvement with gemstones started early with collecting gemstones, collecting crystals and minerals. More recently, my focus has been specifically Paraiba Tourmaline. I found myself in a position where I could help the industry with some of the access and knowledge that I'm privy to. So I've really been focused on lifting up Paraiba Tourmaline as my main goal, my main mission as far as my gemstone involvement. I did graduate at the Gemological Institute of America, so I do have an extensive knowledge of other minerals, but my focus has been Paraíba. The gemstones really came about from my love of nature. So I grew up in South Florida, close to the beach, and I've always been very appreciative of nature and the natural world, and as well as my Brazilian culture. And I think I always knew that I was going to be involved in some facet of nature somehow, and I just so happened to land on gemstones. My family's background in gemstones made it very easy to have access to rough, to have access to mines, to have access to things that maybe aren't so common for people who get started in the industry. So it was very easy for me to navigate the difficult world of getting involved in minerals and crystals and gems because I had the support of my family and the family business. So it started off as collecting, and then slowly I got more education. I went to school. I was able to learn more about the market, about sourcing, and very quickly I was attending gem shows, buying gemstones, selling stones, and that's when I noticed that need for a bit more education with something that I had a bit of access to, which kind of led me into that direction, the educational part. I really see myself as a storyteller. I love telling stories, so being able to share with individuals my passion and get them passionate about what I'm passionate about through storytelling, for me is very satisfying. And then I coupled that with my access to gemstones, and it just led to where I am today as a kind of a point of reference for Paraíba and someone who is constantly looking to improve the relationship between the mine and the market. Just constantly looking to improve that. So my relationship really stems from my love of nature, my love of the natural world, and my desire to involve people in the family business and what my family's been doing for a while now. The story of Paraíba is it's pretty incredible, but at the same time it's fairly recent for a gemstone to have been discovered in the last 30 so years. It's a fairly recent gemstone. But the story really started in Brazil. There was a study that was done in Paraíba, Brazil, where the Ministry of Mineralogy and the organ in Brazil that is doing these geological studies found a pegmatite that was promising, a promising pegmatite in an area of Paraíba, Brazil, on this mountainside in the town of São José da Batalha. So in Paraíba, there was a pegmatite that was found in 1981, more or less. 1982, a gentleman named Heitor Barbosa was driving through Paraíba, and he stumbled upon this find. And it took him a little while to develop the area, but he stayed in Paraíba for about 7 years before he actually found anything worth, anything that we associate today to Paraíba. It took him about 7 years of working in that area before he found anything. And he found something substantial in 1989, and that's what everybody knows about. Everybody knows about the substantial find that happened in the beginning of 1989, February, March, the beginning of summer, around the summertime, 1989. In Paraíba, he had a production of these super colored, neon, rich saturation tourmaline that nobody had ever seen before. And as they made their way to market, they were dubbed the tourmaline from Paraíba, and eventually Tourmaline Paraiba, Paraiba Tourmaline. That's the name that was given to that neon stone that was discovered. So in 1989 it was found, that production, and that was then the base comparison that all other Paraiba were based to, was that find in 1989. And moving down the line, they discovered that it wasn't just the hole in the ground that Heitor Barbosa had found, but it was in fact an entire mountain range that occurred. There was a geological occurrence that happened about 650 million years ago, where there was a fold in the mountain range that caused the geological situation and the properties to be possible for the growth of this stone that contained copper. So the copper, they assume, comes from the underlying rock beneath. But what happened was this fold caused that to be possible in that one place. And that mountain range became known as the City del Fold Belt, or the Borborema area, and different claims, different mines started appearing over the next few years. So between 1989 and 1991, we'll call it, about 3 years, it was just constant finding new claims, finding new areas, discovering new pegmatites of potential Paraiba tourmaline occurrences, right? And that story went on in Brazil until about 2001. They started to discover a similar stone, a stone with similar chemical properties as the ones in Brazil. They started to find these in Nigeria. So Nigeria became known as a new potential deposit for Paraiba tourmalines. So it was discovered that these stones, eventually, they were part of a mountain range that connected Brazil to Nigeria when the continents were together. This mountain range extended through what today is the Atlantic Ocean, and the same stone properties were found in Brazil as were found in Nigeria, very similar. So then you had this 2001, 2002, this spark of interest in Africa with these new stones coming up in Africa. Something that was unheard of. Paraiba was only from Brazil, and now you were finding these copper stones in Africa. And then subsequently, 2003-ish, in Mozambique as well. So what started in Brazil with Heitor Barbosa discovering a super special tourmaline that contained copper and gave it this light within itself, this color that no one had seen before in tourmaline, started in 1989 in Brazil, now made its way to Africa, to Nigeria and to Mozambique, where more of these copper stones were discovered. So the story, it's intercontinental, right? It started in one continent in Brazil and South America and made its way all the way to Africa, and continues to develop. The claims, they continue to find new potential areas. There's always new potential areas that are being discovered. It's just a matter of time before some new deposits are discovered or current deposits are explored even further. So the story will continue developing. We're at a point right now where you have this history and you have this new chapter, you can call it, in Africa, but it will continue to develop without a doubt. I'm sure within the next few years we'll continue to see new deposits, new developments in the story of Paraíba. At present day in Brazil, there is one mountain range that produces the copper-bearing tourmalines that we call Paraíba. One mountain range. It is the Borborema area, the Seridó Fold Belt is what they call it. It's an area that extends from the northern state of Paraíba, the northern part of the state of Paraíba, Brazil, up to Rio Grande do Norte, which is another state, so it crosses over the border. That area is the only place in Brazil where Paraiba tourmaline has been found. Now there are different claims around that mountain range. You have some in Rio Grande do Norte, you have some down in Paraíba, but all of them make part of that geological formation. At present today, June 2024, the only real mine that is active and producing on a regular basis, we can call it, is the Parelhas mine in Rio Grande do Norte. It's the Molongo area of Rio Grande do Norte in Parelhas. That is the only place right now that is producing on a regular basis. Now, of course, you have artisanal miners, you have some people who are constantly finding things in secondary deposits and alluvial deposits. You can find people selling rough in that area, but the only active mine at this point is that one in Rio Grande do Norte. The only active one. So as far as imitations of Paraíba, Paraíba is a tourmaline. Tourmaline cannot be synthesized, so it's not something that can be made in a lab. Now there are things that look like Paraíba. Maybe one of the biggest culprits is neon blue apatite. Neon blue apatite is a stone that constantly gets confused with Paraíba, even in the mine, because the blue apatite actually grows alongside the Paraíba inside the gem mines in Brazil. So many times it might look like Paraíba, but it's actually apatite. So even in the rough form, it can be misconstrued as Paraíba. So that is a stone that is constantly imitating Paraíba. It's the apatite. But through simple gemological testing, you can decipher one from the other. Other than that, that's very closely related as far as physical appearance, you have stones like aquamarine, you have stones like topaz, or even colored glass that can imitate Paraíba pretty convincingly at times. But again, the simple gemological testing, you can rule out tourmaline from other stones. Now, one thing that is very difficult to separate with standard gemological testing is standard common tourmaline from Paraíba. Really, they are the same stone, but at a molecular level, in the chemistry, they are different. And the only way to test for chemistry is with a bit more of a lab testing. You would have to use infrared spectrometry. You'd have to use a few different other gemological tests to ensure that the stone actually contains the copper sufficient to be considered Paraíba. So as far as imitations, a common tourmaline can serve as an excellent imitation for Paraíba, but with further gemological testing, with further lab testing really, you can decipher between the two. As far as treatment of Paraíba is definitely something that plays a big role in the market. People want to know about treatments today, nowadays, with it being so important to be transparent. Treatments are it's something that is kind of a deciding factor for many people, right? And with Paraíba in general, heating at low temperatures is a treatment that is widely accepted in the trade, heating at a low temperature. Now, there are other treatments, such as fracture filling and clarity enhancement, that are additional treatments that can be done to the stone to improve its apparent clarity, improve its physical appearance. A lot of times, similar to emerald, you have different oils or different resins or synthetic oils that are used to hide some of the unsightly fractures within the stone that normally occur when the stone is heated. So after you heat the stone, many times you'll have some internal fractures that can be minimized, you can call it, with an oil treatment. So as far as treatments for Paraíba, those are the majority of the treatments off the top of my head. I can't think of any other outlandish treatments that have been done with Paraiba other than the heating and the clarity enhancement. I'm sure moving down the line with technology and with things developing, there may be other things that become available to improve the stone. But ultimately, the goal of treatments is to bring the most attractive stone possible to market. Now, it does have an effect on price, so it's something that plays a role in decision making when buying Paraiba. But as far as treatments, heating and clarity enhancement are the two that are big for Paraiba. I think I attribute much of the success of Paraiba to the fact that it's so different than most stones. Any stone that has any kind of differentiating factor in it is going to be attractive to the public. And Paraiba has this ability to captivate the viewer because of this internal light, this color, this neon electric light that it emits. And it's not for all Paraiba, of course, but when you see that, it immediately marks you. It immediately makes you remember that. And for anyone who's looking for anything special and different, especially designers or a client who's looking to purchase something memorable, right? That is memorable. That is different. That is unique. And nowadays, of course, you have the individuals who are more traditional, more interested in something a bit more conventional, the big three, emerald, ruby, sapphire, diamond. Of course, that will always have its place, but for those who like the different, those who like the unique, those who want something different to talk about, Paraiba is that unusual stone, right? Paraiba has this ability to captivate those who can understand it. And I think I definitely attribute much of the success to that. It's almost like a counterculture. It's almost like against the norm, against the grain. So I would say that a lot of it is attributed to that. It's just that the fact that it's different, the fact that it's unique. It's new as well. We're talking 30 years that it's been now out and open to the public, and it's new. People like that. So I get that a lot. I get that obstacle, that challenge a lot, where Paraiba is too expensive, right? It's very high, the price. When you're comparing Paraiba to its common counterpart, common tourmaline, you're right, the price is very different, almost off-putting by how different it is. But when you place Paraiba tourmaline next to a cashmere sapphire, or a Burma ruby, or a Mozambique ruby, the price is not so far off. You wouldn't question an expensive Brazilian alexandrite. You wouldn't question that. So the price in itself had a huge change, right? So the price in itself had a lot of evolution in a short amount of time. And I think that scared a lot of individuals who, back in the 1990s, were purchasing stones at one price, and where today it may be 10x what they were paying at that time. Of course, times change, recession, economy, all of that changes, but the lack of information and the lack of justification of the price, the lack of that information being out there, makes it very difficult for a consumer or a client to consider such an expensive stone. It makes it more difficult. Now, if you can justify the price, if you can explain, well, we find, let's say, 10 stones per year in Brazil. 10 stones the entire year over 2 carats. And you want one, right? So when you can explain that that kind of rarity is the reality of Paraiba, then you start to be able to justify the price. But it can be difficult for a consumer to make heads or tails of whether the price is legitimate or not when that information isn't available, when that information isn't present, when the individual speaking to them does not have that information to give to them to justify the price. So how hard is it to find Paraiba? I have people ask me all the time what it's like inside of a Paraiba mine. I think the image that people have in their heads maybe is you walk into this hole and the walls are filled with blue crystals all over the place, and we have buckets filled with Paraiba, and we can walk in and say, I want this size, I want this color, a matching pair. But unfortunately, it's not like that. I spent months traveling through Brazil and through Africa in different mines, different locations, and I can remember twice that I saw Paraiba sticking out of the wall in months, because unfortunately it does not behave like other tourmalines. Other tourmalines, we have an abundance of blue and green and red tourmaline that we may get from a pegmatite vein in a mine that produces that. We're constantly producing that kind of material, but for Paraiba, that's just not the reality. So how hard is it to find Paraiba? Very hard, very hard. And it's something that the only thing that a miner has is hope, because it can be months and weeks, maybe even years without production. I was actually speaking to one of the owners of this Malongo mine that I had mentioned. Between 2000 and 2003, there was almost no significant production, maybe a little thing here or there. But for 2 years, from 2000 to 3 years, no production. So imagine a mine owner spending well over $200,000-300,000 a month to produce stones and not producing anything for years. It is very discouraging. So miners many times hold on to hope. And with Paraiba, it's no different. Paraiba is hope, and the hope of maybe having a production. So when the price tag comes up and it looks big, having that extra information, understanding how difficult it is to produce that, justifies the price, justifies the lack of availability. This book has been 2 years in the making. We began this project with the intention of increasing the general awareness of Paraiba for the end consumer. We didn't want to create anything that was too heavy in vocabulary or too scientific, because we wanted people to read it. We wanted people to participate in the story and understand the story a bit so they can appreciate more the stone. So this book was created with that intention, with stimulating the end consumer, the client, the collector, the individual who walks into a designer's showroom or to a jeweler. We wanted to stimulate their thinking about Paraiba, have them have that in their mind, that Paraiba exists, that there's a story, a beautiful story behind it. And the best way we found to give this information to the end consumer is by creating something beautiful that was easy to read, that had a purpose, a beginning, a middle, and an end, and the purpose being to increase the general awareness. So the book was divided up into sections where in the beginning I talk about the history of Paraiba in Brazil, the development of the market, the subsequent finds in Africa and Mozambique and Nigeria. And then we have Katarina's part that talks about the different applications in jewelry, the incredible pieces that were created over the years using this stone, the color, the art. So it's broken up into those two sections, and then we have an entire section that's dedicated to the different jewelry houses and designers showcasing these beautiful pieces. We wanted to create something beautiful. We wanted to create something that would be lasting, and we succeeded, absolutely succeeded in creating something that the world hasn't seen yet.